Hey Starship Addicts, my name is Zach Golden, and welcome to another CSI Starbase Deep Dive Investigation. We have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to attempt to get into this as quickly as possible. All of you returning viewers, go ahead and take this time to throw a bag of popcorn in the microwave, because this is that episode I've been warning you about for the last 2 months, and it's going to get a little intense. For everyone else, if this is your first time clicking on a CSI Starbase thumbnail, then hello, and welcome to the channel. Thanks for giving us a chance. I don't usually do this, but because of the length of this episode, I feel like I should give you a fair warning about what you're walking into out of respect for your time. If you're looking for a quick summary of this week's events at Starbase while SpaceX is preparing for the upcoming 33-engine static fire test, you have come to the wrong place, my friend, because this is deep dive territory. This feature-length episode that you've just stumbled upon is meant for people who want to get a real understanding of the serious challenges that SpaceX is up against as they prepare for this first ever 33-engine static fire test. So, what is it that makes this launch system so complex and dangerous? What solutions has SpaceX come up with over the last 3 months in order to enable themselves to safely pull off a 33-engine static fire without destroying the vehicle and launch system in the process? Will these solutions be enough for the first orbital flight test, or are there some important indications that we should be on the lookout for before we even start to get our hopes up? If you're unsure of how to answer any of these questions, then you might want to take a seat and buckle up, because as soon as the rest of these people get back from making that popcorn, it's about to go down.
Welcome to CSI Starbase.
You know, I want to let you all in on a secret. Our agency puts a massive amount of time, resources, and energy into gathering the information and content required in order to explain these advanced topics. There will be many times where you will spot a clear opening for me to just skip straight to the answer. But I want you to understand that it's my personal mission that no matter what level of experience you have, whether you just discovered Starship yesterday or you're a talented engineer who could probably get a job working for SpaceX tomorrow, you will learn something that you didn't know before today. This deep dive investigation is structured for you to understand it without ever having seen any of the past CSI Starbase episodes. However, if you want to maximize this experience, I recommend going back and watching all 6 of these episodes if you make it all the way to the end of this one. Those of you who have already seen these episodes will pick up on many subtle details and hints that will be missed otherwise. For the sake of time, I will not re-explain things that have already been thoroughly covered in those episodes, but I will correct the record on any past speculation that may have turned out to be false.
On August 16th of this year, I released this deep dive investigation, Booster 7 Explosion, a detailed examination of the complex mechanical systems involved. In this deep dive event, I explained how the orbital launch mount was constructed. In particular, we discussed most of the major internal and external systems and components that work together to make this the most advanced launch system on the planet. This includes the gigantic hold-down clamps, the Raptor quick disconnects that are used to spin up the outer 20 Raptor boost engines, and the igniter panels on the side of the launch mount, which are responsible for the actual ignition of those same 20 engines. Using this information, we were able to get a better understanding of what we believe went wrong during the Booster 7 testing anomaly that occurred back in July. The only problem is, some of the conclusions that we came to were a bit flawed because there is one important feature of the orbital launch pad that we have not yet discussed. The feature I'm referring to is the cryogenic propellant vapor recovery system. If this system is working properly, then SpaceX should be able to recover most of the methane used during these tests. There are, however, a few special cases where recovery is near impossible. The first case is during the initial depressurization of the methane tank at the start of detanking operations. Second is the obvious loss of any methane consumed by the engines during a static fire test. And the third special case is during the spin-up process of the 33 Raptor 2 engines, as I mentioned during that episode. This is the part of the investigation where I believe we left some major holes in the information that need to be filled.
In order to do that, we need to approach this from a different angle than we did last time. Once we establish a basic understanding of how the vapor recovery system works, we can reevaluate the explosive incident and get to the bottom of what really happened. The last thing I want to say before we get too deep into this is that if you learned something that you didn't know prior to today by the time this hourglass runs out in 3 minutes, then please consider supporting CSI Starbase by hitting that like button. One of the most frequent comments I see in these episodes is, why is this the first time I'm seeing this channel in my recommendations? Well, the reason is because the YouTube algorithm has to receive a massive amount of bribes in the form of likes before it decides that the content is worth sharing to a broader audience. So, Thanks to each and every one of you who have contributed to the growth of this channel just by sending a thumbs up our way.
All right, let's start from the beginning. The reason that SpaceX would need a vapor recovery system is because without it, they would end up venting off a large volume of methane into the atmosphere for hours at a time during the propellant loading process of the booster and Starship. But of course, you can never recover 100% of the gas, so they will still probably emit some methane during spin prime and static fire tests. If these escaped gases were responsible for the explosion, then we need to know exactly where they're coming from. An important clue to answering this question actually came to me while discussing this topic with Marcus House a few months ago.
So, are you sure that the methane gas is being leaked out? Because that's used as one of the spin-up gases, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know, Marcus. It's really hard to prove this theory considering that it would be near invisible if that's the case.
Well, I don't really understand how it could be invisible because, according to the program Environmental Analysis, SpaceX is expecting to release up to 7 metric tons of methane into the atmosphere during launch and static fire testing operations. I mean, that's quite a lot, mate, and surely we would be able to see 7 tons of methane.
Yeah, I mean, that might sound like a lot, especially when you consider the fact that a larger LNG tanker truck can hold about 28 tons of liquid methane. So that's a quarter of a tanker. But when you consider that the booster and Starship require roughly 1,000 tons of methane in order to fill both tanks, 0.7% of the total seems pretty low.
Well, unfortunately, anything above 0% loss is going to come with some kind of impact to the environment, which we just can't really ignore.
Yeah, but we will for now because this investigation is about mitigating the explosive risks that come with operating a system like this, not the environmental ones. I don't think you need me to tell you that this entire operation is extremely complex and high risk.
Did you just steal that quote
Marcus, I think I'm going to need to examine this methane recovery system to see if there's something I'm missing here. But it's going to take a while to gather the required material to properly explain this.
All right, mate. Well, I'll look forward to hearing it.
All right, so here we are, 2 months later, and I've realized that in order to explain the methane recovery system and also track down where the 7 tons of methane is coming from, we need to go step by step through the propellant loading process. Due to the complexity of the methane side of the tank farm, it's going to be much easier to explain what's happening over there if we start off by looking at the liquid oxygen side first. See, the thing is, in a way, the exact same process is occurring on both sides of the tank farm at the exact same time. There are a few key differences though, and those are very important to understand. Obviously, there's 0% chance that SpaceX is going to let me in here in order to give y'all a tour. This process is far too dangerous to even have employees on site while it's occurring, let alone random YouTubers like me, even with the proper safety gear on. But I did come prepared. So yeah, we don't want to get arrested for trespassing because that would be bad. Instead, thanks to Andy, creator of the Starbase simulator game, we don't have to take this risk because we can do it virtually. Now that Andy has updated the game in order to include the tank farm propellant loading process, we're actually going to be able to see way more than we would if we took the guaranteed jail sentence route. Hopefully, by the end of this, you will better understand what you're seeing at various times during future testing events. Okay, that should be everything. I think I'm ready to do this.
So, starting off from the beginning, this is the Orbital tank farm. Andy has made it easier for us to visualize what's happening here by color-coding all of the different liquids. So, in blue, we have the liquid oxygen, green is liquid nitrogen, and over there, in the horizontal storage tanks, we have liquid methane, which is colored orange. The cryogenic liquid oxygen is stored in these 3 tanks, which are connected together in pretty much every way imaginable. These are referred to as GSE tanks, which stands for ground support equipment. These 9-meter wide tanks have a 1.5 meter thick layer of insulation in between the inner storage tank and the outer cover that functions as a jacket. This helps keep the fluid at cryogenic temperatures for extended periods of time. But no matter how much insulation you have, there is always going to be a little boil-off as it slowly begins to warm over time. As LOX transitions from a liquid to a gas, it drastically increases in volume, which simultaneously increases the pressure inside of the tank. Because these tanks are connected together, they each experience this pressure increase at the same time. Think of them as conjoined GSE triplets. The tanks are designed to operate within a certain pressure range, just like the Starship and booster. As the pressure inside of these tanks begins to approach the upper limit, a relief valve will open on all 3 tanks at the same time, and they will vent the excess gas through this bleed-off manifold, which has a vent stack attached to the first LOX tank. If you visit Starbase, you will occasionally see this venting at random times during the day as the pressure regulation system kicks in. 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, SpaceX is slowly losing oxygen out of these tanks, which is important to note for later when we talk about the methane system. The same principles apply on that side as well, although the way it is handled is completely different. Before transferring the liquid oxygen from the GSE tanks all the way over to the booster sitting on the launch mount, it must first undergo a superchilling process in order to shrink the size of the oxygen molecules. This increases the total mass of oxygen that is able to be loaded onto the booster.
In order to do this, SpaceX runs the liquid oxygen through a set of heat exchangers designed to supercool the liquid molecules. This is a special type of heat exchanger called a kettle reboiler. Before the testing begins, and sometimes even before the road is closed, these tanks will begin to fill up with liquid nitrogen until the internal heat exchanger coil is completely submerged. This isn't exactly what the coil looks like, but it's been simplified for this demonstration. We actually don't get to see this happen anymore on the liquid oxygen side because the liquid oxygen kettle reboilers are now completely insulated on the outside. So, thankfully, we have this animation from Andy to help us out.
Moving on to the next step, there is a massive pipe that connects the outlet on the bottom of the tanks for discharging liquid oxygen. On a normal day, these pipes are empty, or flooded up to this point.
Once this massive red valve is open, the liquid oxygen will begin to flow through it and into these 3 pumps shown here. The problem is, you don't want to start pumping right away as soon as the valve opens. The reason is because the empty pipes have been sitting out in the hot Texas sun all day, and even though they're insulated, after a long period of time without being in use, these will become very warm. When the valve opens, the cryogenic liquid oxygen will immediately begin to vaporize on contact with the warm steel. This means that you must slowly flood the pipes all the way up to the pumps and allow them to cool down so the liquid stops boiling off. The temperature inside these pipes will need to drop down to at least negative 273 degrees Fahrenheit in order for the LOX to stop boiling off on contact. If these pumps were to turn on before the pipes have a chance to cool down, then there's a high probability of cavitation occurring, which would cause some pretty serious damage. I've explained this on past episodes, so if you want to learn more about pump cavitation, I've put a link in the description of this video again.
After the liquid oxygen leaves the pumps, it follows this path until it reaches the upper manifold and then splits off into each of the heat exchangers. We are only simulating one pump and one heat exchanger here in order to make it easier to understand.
As soon as the fluid reaches the kettle reboiler, the warmer liquid oxygen begins to transfer heat over to the nitrogen, causing it to start boiling off. There are no valves that control the release of nitrogen gas out of the back of these kettle boilers. As soon as enough pressure is built up inside, it will push open the flaps on the back of the exhaust vents. During this phase, they will begin belching out large clouds of nitrogen and then closing again until the pressure builds up once more. As the volumetric flow rate of LOX that goes through the pumps and through the coils increases, so will the amount of vapor coming out of the back of these vents. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves though, because this is still just the prime-up phase. Once the initial flow of liquid oxygen has passed through these 4 kettle boilers, it exits through the bottom and recombines into a single tube and sends it over to the fluids bunker.
The valves inside of this bunker will probably be closed at this point in order to allow the pipes to fill up with liquid oxygen and cool down just like before. I believe that during and immediately after the process of flooding the pumps, you will see a large amount of venting occur in this area as SpaceX releases the vaporized oxygen gas, which is officially referred to as GOX. Off to the side of the fluids bunker, this is known as a bleed-off valve, but we refer to this one as the grass vent just to make it easier to distinguish it from the others. The grass vent happens as GOX is continuously vented from the system until it starts to turn into a liquid as the pipes have finally chilled down enough to allow the liquid to reach the next control valve. At this point, the large valve can be opened and the grass vent that leads off into the side of the bunker can be closed. From here, the liquid oxygen must travel underground for several hundred feet before it reaches the bottom of the launch mount. Using this RGB image from November of 2021, we can see the path that it takes to get there. Once it reaches the OLM, it travels up the legs and then goes into the back of the booster quick disconnect. Not only is this a long distance, but the liquid oxygen supply pipe shown here is insanely large. Looking at the SpaceX workers for comparison, you can see that they are roughly 20 inches in diameter. When you consider the thickness of the pipe walls, it really becomes hard to imagine exactly how much steel we're talking about here that needs to be chilled down before the liquid oxygen pumps can start pushing fluid into the booster. If they were to immediately start pumping fluid as soon as the bunker control valves open, the liquid oxygen would start boiling off so quickly and violently that you might not be able to purge it off in time. Keep in mind that the expansion ratio of liquid oxygen is 1 to 861. In other words, 1 liter of liquid oxygen will expand into 861 liters of gaseous O2 once its transition from the liquid to gas phase is complete. So, just like last time, after the valve is opened, liquid oxygen will begin to trickle into the system, slowly making its way to the launch mount. This makes it so the boil-off within the pipes occurs slowly, like it does here in this experiment from the T-Core YouTube channel. On the flip side, this is an example of what you don't want happening. This volcano effect can cause dramatic increases in pressure that are much more difficult to predict and manage. Just as before, there needs to be a bleed-off valve located at the end of this pipe section in order to relieve the pressure from the gas as it continues to boil off inside of the pipes. If you have ever watched a super heavy booster test on the orbital launch mount, then you'll be very familiar with this one. It's located on the side of the OLM and is controlled by this blue valve actuator, which makes it stick out like a sore thumb. When this valve opens, gaseous oxygen begins to flow out of the vent. The intensity of the flow gradually increases as the liquid oxygen slowly makes its way from the fluids bunker to the launch mount. When the fluid finally reaches the vent, it's extremely obvious. The vapor cloud that started off as a tail extending from the launch mount suddenly turns into a tidal wave that stretches all the way to the other side of the launch site. In order to make the cloud dissipate faster and to prevent the liquid oxygen from pooling up underneath the launch mount, SpaceX has incorporated a special nozzle onto the end of the bleed-off valve. When we look at it closely, we can see 3 rotating blades at the end of the nozzle which break up the fluid flow, causing it to fan out in a cone-shaped cloud instead of falling to the ground like water coming out of a garden hose. After several minutes of confirmed liquid flow, the bleed-off valve is closed and liquid oxygen can begin flowing up into the gigantic flex hose and then to the back of the booster quick disconnect. Hopefully, now that you understand this, I can skip the long explanation about how the exact same process happens on the Orbital Launch Integration Tower, starting from the vent on the base of the structure. Then another one near the top of the vertical risers on the 5th level of the tower, and then one more on the Starship quick disconnect arm.
Alright, now that we understand the basics of preloading liquid oxygen onto the Super Heavy booster in Starship, let's move over to the methane side of the tank farm. All the same rules about trickling the cryogenic methane into each section of the pipe system apply here as well. Everything that's happening on the liquid oxygen side must also occur on the methane side at the same time. Every location where there is a liquid oxygen prime-up bleed valve, there must also be an equivalent methane bleed valve in order to relieve the pressure from the vaporized gas as it builds up inside of the pipes. The major difference is you can't see this process of priming up each section of pipe occurring the way that you can on the liquid oxygen side. Well, you can, but the signs are different. The reason is because SpaceX does everything possible to recover methane at all stages of the propellant loading process. So instead of having open atmosphere on the other side of all of those bleed-off valves that we discussed, the flow of gas is being diverted to the methane recovery system. No one cares if you purge off massive amounts of oxygen during these testing events. It's actually cheaper to do so, and I, for one, kind of appreciate it. We can never have too much oxygen out here. Methane, on the other hand, is a highly potent greenhouse gas. So purging it off into the atmosphere like this would be viewed as irresponsible and incredibly dangerous, given the possibility of the two gases mixing together to form an explosive mixture in the area surrounding the tank farm and the launch pad. The process of preventing as much methane as possible from escaping into the atmosphere is a 24/7 job at Starbase. As long as there is fuel in these 7 horizontal methane tanks, the recovery system is active. This process is extremely complex and is the reason that the right side of the tank farm looks so much different from the left side. Minus the obvious fact that instead of using these 40-meter tall vertical storage tanks as originally planned, they're using these horizontal ones, which I'm sure everyone at the GSE team at SpaceX secretly hates. So how does it work? Well, let's go through the whole process just like we did with the liquid oxygen side.
First things first, the reason I describe this as a 24/7 operation is because the methane stored inside of these tanks is going to constantly boil off over time, just like the liquid oxygen. Instead of purging the methane gas off to the open atmosphere, it's collected in a return pipe and then routed over to this tank that sits just behind the 2 methane kettle reboilers. Just like the hippo-shaped kettles, this is also a heat exchanger tank. It uses liquid nitrogen to condense gaseous methane back into its liquid state, where it can then be returned to the storage tanks. No matter what time of day it is, you can see this tank doing its job. Sometimes the flow is near invisible, and without something in the background like these heat shield tiles from Ship 24's belly, you probably wouldn't even notice it. As the amount of methane gas being processed by this heat exchanger increases, both the sound and density of the nitrogen gas flowing out of the vent stack increases with it. Returning to the fuel loading process, the next step is identical to the LOX side of the tank farm. First, the kettle boilers are filled with liquid nitrogen so that all of the heat exchanger coils inside are completely submerged. Next, liquid methane is slowly trickled into the system in order to warm up the pipes in between the tanks and the pumps. As before, until this is complete, the pumps will not be turned on in order to prevent them from sustaining damage due to cavitation. Between me and you though, I don't think the anti-cavitation measures are working so well on the methane side of the tank farm, but we will save that combo for another day because it doesn't have anything to do with the recovery system. After the pumps and kettle boilers are primed, the methane is sent to the fluids bunker. To relieve the gas pressure in the system as the pipes are being flooded, there is a bleed valve probably just a few feet away from the one used for the liquid oxygen. Instead of a grass vent like the lock side, this vaporized methane gas is sent back to the same heat exchanger used to handle the boil-off gas from the storage tanks. It's really difficult to tell when it reaches the bunker like you can with the grass vent, but activity on the heat exchanger vent is a good sign of when the transitions between different stages of the process are occurring. The rate that methane is trickled into the rest of the system is limited by how quickly this heat exchanger is able to convert the resulting vaporized gas back into a liquid. Like I said, it's pretty complex. Finally, with the second stage of prime-up now complete, SpaceX can begin sending liquid methane, aka Raptor juice, up to the launch mount. This is where I believe another key difference between the liquid oxygen and methane side of the tank farm come into play. The liquid oxygen side has nice tall vertical storage tanks that are nearly full, so they can hydrostatically push the fluid all the way to the height of the booster quick disconnect. As we all know, methane is stored in the horizontal tanks, which are well below the height of the QD.
So this means that without a significant amount of back pressure in the tanks or engaging the methane pumps, the fluid levels in these pipes aren't going to get much higher than the height of where I'm staying at right now.
Meanwhile, the liquid oxygen fluid level has already reached the flex hose for the QD. We know this because the bleed valve on the side of the OLM just closed while we were being blinded by the fog. So now it's time to activate one of the methane pumps on a very low flow rate setting. You can tell this is happening because the two vents on the back of the kettle boilers will begin ejecting twin plumes of nitrogen. It starts off relatively quiet, sounding a bit like the blowers that are activated at the end of an automated car wash cycle. Now that the kettle boilers are doing their thing, we can assume that SpaceX is slowly pumping methane from the base of the OLM up to the booster QD on the orbital launch mount as they begin priming up that last section of cryotubing. Returning to the location just above the LOX bleed vent, we can see another blue valve actuator connected to a pipe that branches off of the main fuel supply tube. There is no way to know for sure, but let's just assume this opened up at the same time as the liquid oxygen bleed back when this stage of preloading began. Once activated, the bleed valve diverts the gas through this pipe over to the other side of the QD, where it's connected to another large black pipe which is officially known as the methane bleed line. The methane bleed line goes down the opposite side of the launch mount, where it combines with the other black methane bleed line coming from the integration tower. From there, it goes back to the tank farm, where it is also processed by the same heat exchanger used in the two previous steps. As soon as the pumps are running, the rate of boil-off inside of the pipes will begin to increase. Assuming the heat exchanger was already running at its maximum cooling capacity, the overflow is diverted to the secondary vertical methane condenser, shown here. After this step is complete, it is time to get to business. Both of the propellant main supply pipes are just about as cold as they are ever going to get. The flow of methane passing through the bleed valve has finally reached the point that even though the valve is open, the liquid has begun to make its way to the top of the flex hoses. Now that the system is fully primed, it's time to close both bleed valves and open the butterfly valves on the QD all at the same time. What you're hearing is without a doubt my favorite sound in all of Starbase, and I'm really grateful for Lab Padre's Rover 2 camera for being in this exact location, even though a lot of the times the vapor cloud gets so thick that you can't see anything at all, just like it did right before the pumps turned on a few minutes ago. The amount of crucial details that I've been able to better understand as a result of this camera being here is insane, as you can tell. The crazy part is, we haven't even started talking about all the things you can see by viewing these same events through the eyes of this camera's twin brother, but we will get there soon enough.
Wow, so we finally understand a good portion of the methane recovery for the super heavy booster, right? I did leave out the part related to detanking, but there's a few reasons for that. Number one, the likelihood of an explosion occurring during detank is super low in my opinion. And don't forget, that's what this entire investigation is about, explosions. Number two, this episode is long enough as it is, and I'm trying to respect y'all's time. And number three, the only person I know who actually cares about detanking other than me is Tim Dodd.
How long does it take to recycle? Because you're probably, what's that look like? Because you have to drain the propellants back into the tanks.
So maybe instead of making an entire episode about it, I'll just explain it to him in person one day, since Elon would. So, If SpaceX is capturing methane in so many different ways, then where is the 7 tons of methane coming from, and is there something that can be done to reduce the risk of explosion? Well, as far as where the methane is coming from, the answer to this one is pretty straightforward because Elon basically told us in his tweets after the incident. He just laid it out there, clear as day. The only problem is that these statements were layered in so much complexity that I don't think most people, myself included at the time, fully understood the amount of information that he was revealing. The tweet I'm referring to started off as a response to the NASA spaceflight footage of the 33-engine spin prime explosion. After retracting a previous statement saying it was intentional, Elon responded, "Yeah, actually not good. Team is assessing damage." In reply to this, a well-known astronomer from the Center of Astrophysics by the name of Dr. Jonathan McDowell mentioned the fact that it's still very early in the development process for the new Raptor 2 engines. To this, Elon responded saying that cryogenic fuel is an added challenge as it evaporates to create a fuel-air explosion risk in a partially oxygen atmosphere like Earth. That said, we have sensors to detect this, and more later. Next, he was asked if it's possible to use a sparkler system to burn off the leaking fuel, similar to the system used underneath the space shuttle before ignition. Elon responded, "That's one of the things we will be doing going forward. This particular issue, however, was specific to the engine spin start test because Raptor has a complex start sequence. Going forward, we won't do a spin start test with all 33 engines at once." A lot to unpack there. First of all, we have not seen sparklers added underneath the launch mount. And trust me, I've been out here looking for them just to be sure. They might be a good thing to have, but they surely would not have prevented what we saw on this day. It would, however, have been seriously awesome to watch, although it would have been incredibly damaging to the launch structure, which Stage Zero Zach would not have been too happy about. Why do I say this? Well, if the sparklers were used during this test, then they might as well have done a 33-engine pre-burner test because that's exactly what would have happened. A solid column of flame shooting out of the bottom of the engines. How do we know this? Well, the reason is because what you're seeing during this spin prime test is more than likely almost entirely liquid methane. There is no leak. Let that sink in for 1 second. You're seeing 7 tons of liquid methane evaporating in front of your eyes. This goes completely against my assumptions from the past, so I'm glad I have the chance to be the one to correct the record for you. So, let's start off with the basics. What is a spin prime test and why is it needed? Well, unfortunately, SpaceX has never released an official explanation about this process. I assume that it would be easy enough to examine the spin prime procedure for other rocket engines and then see if we can apply it to the Raptor 2. Unfortunately, this was easier said than done. The Raptor 2 is vastly different from every other engine out there. I might be a Stage 0 pseudo-expert, but I don't know enough about rocket engines in order to safely make the correct one-to-one comparison. Also, this episode was already significantly delayed as it is, so I didn't really have time to be hopping into various aerospace textbooks or spend a ridiculous amount of hours watching YouTube videos about all the different rocket engine cycles. I needed to speak with someone who knows what they're talking about and can help answering the lingering questions. That's why I took this unannounced trip to Starbase, because I had a feeling that the person I needed to speak with might still be near the scene of the incident. Also, considering this person probably doesn't want to be found, it was best to keep my arrival secret in order to prevent them from giving us the slip. Oh, perfect timing. This is one of our newest CSI Starbase field agents calling right now. Hopefully he has some good news. Go for Stage 0, Zach. Ah, great news. Wow. Okay, where'd you find him? Pretty impressive. So, yeah, where are you currently holding him? Wait, what? Why would you bring him to my room? Good Lord. You have some questionable decision-making skills. For now, just hold him right where he is. Make sure the room is secure. I'm on my way. Wow. So honestly, I was a little hesitant on bringing Agent Ruliani with us because, he has a tendency to do some pretty crazy stuff sometimes. Like bringing whoever this is back to my hotel? What a terrible idea. Oh my God.
Help me. Who's there?
Woo! Nobody go in there about 35, 45 minutes. Golden boy, you back. See what I brought you? You're gonna love this one, buddy. Check this out. Tim died.
I don't know why I'm here.
Well. Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut. I gotta say, Agent Ruliani, you have outdone yourself this time. This is an extremely elusive man. I'm surprised you were able to catch him without being recognized. Impressive.
Well, to be honest, sir, he did recognize me. Pretty much immediately, too.
Hold up. Are you saying your cover's blown? Who else knows about this?
I don't think so. What happened was I was at the rocket ranch asking around to see if anyone had seen him. Told him I heard he was in town and I just wanted to meet one of my idols.
And?
Well, someone must have tipped him off because I looked out the window just in time to catch him fleeing the scene. Luckily, with them skinny jeans on, he can't exactly run away, if you know what I mean. It's more like a brisk jog. So it gave me time to exit calmly without causing any alarm and then initiate pursuit when I was clear of the onlookers. So I don't think anyone else noticed. And due to his lack of ability to take long strides, I was able to catch up to him pretty quickly. He pretty much apprehended himself, honestly. Self-arresting skinny jeans. Would you believe that?
I think we might actually have to coin that one. Thank you, Agent Ruliani. You have outdone yourself, as I said. Please excuse me while I have a word with our new informant. By the way, I think I'm going to be busy for the rest of the evening, so I think I'm going to need you to cover for me at Lab Padres Crowfest. Please do not make a scene. Can you handle this?
Count on you not to let me down, Judy.
Lots of important people there.
Oh, you ain't got to worry about me, sir. I will not let you down.
I trust you.
And I brought my dancing shoes.
Talk soon.
I know this might seem like an overly aggressive method that we employed in order to gather the required information. But don't worry, I can guarantee that the everyday astronaut was not harmed during the process, and I took special care to make sure that he was comfortable.
You thirsty, Tim?
Yeah, I guess.
Well, all I got is water in the solid form, so drink up.
Seriously? You brought me ice?
From my experience, it's usually a good idea to start off with some basic questions in order to test out the witness's willingness to cooperate.
I have some questions that I want to ask you here today, related to Raptor engines and specifically the cooling process.
As expected, Tim immediately attempted a desperate tactic that a lot of first-time informants usually resort to.
I gotta tell you, straight up top, I don't know hardly anything. I'm just a YouTube guy, I don't know this.
But through some persistence, we were able to get a lot of important information out of him. This allowed me to fill in some missing pieces of the evidence needed in order to come to the following conclusions. The first important detail that we need to understand is that the engine pre-chill sequence for the Raptor 2 is only for the oxygen side of the engine. That's a little counterintuitive, right? Especially considering that there is significantly more surface area to cool on the methane side, given that it has to travel through the engine bells before it reaches the fuel-rich preburner. The reason I say this is because it should be very similar to the regenerative cooling system used on a lot of rocket engines. I figured the best one to compare it to would be the RS-25 engine used on the Space Shuttle and SLS. This is one of the first things I needed Tim to explain.
What do you know about the cooling method used on the RS-25 engine?
Well, the RS-25 is regeneratively cooled, so they actually do run cryogenic propellant through the walls of the rocket engine. You'll actually notice it gets really frosty, like there's literally condensation and ice buildup on the outside of the engine. Yet on the inside of the engine, it's scorching hot, but that's how they keep the walls and the combustion chamber from melting.
So is this a liquid or a gas in here?
So inside the walls, there might actually be a phase change at some point from liquid, because it starts off liquid. By the time it reaches the main combustion chamber, it's often gas, but there may or may not be a phase change as it goes through the walls.
After this, Tim proceeded to tell me that he believes this is the same process on the Raptor 2 engine, with the liquid methane flowing through the engine bells. At this point, I started to realize that he was trying to give me the runaround, so I had to press harder.
I mean, what's your goal in the Raptor 2 engine? Are you sending gas to the preburner, or are you sending liquid?
Well, I'm pretty sure it shows up in the preburner still as a liquid.
You think so?
I think so.
Then why isn't the engine frosty, Tim?
Well, it could. I actually have never really considered that, to be honest. It could just be like the thickness of the walls. It could be the ambient conditions. I don't know what exactly. I don't know how it could be gas before it reaches the walls, because it goes straight from through the front. Oh, I have to think about this with full flow.
Yeah.
At this moment, I knew I had him backed into a corner. Frosty engine bells, whether it's on a sea-level variant or the larger vacuum-optimized version, is something we have never seen on a Raptor 2 engine. I believe that by the time the methane has traveled through the engine bell and reaches the preburner, it needs to already be fully transitioned over to the gas phase. So if the methane side of the engine does not need to be pre-chilled, by extension, that means that all of the internal pipework containing methane should be empty until the spin-up process is initiated. On the other hand, as Tim Dodd stated in his video, it's extremely important to pre-chill the oxidizer turbopump due to the incredibly high temperatures that it will experience in comparison to the methane turbopump. So this is why we see the liquid oxygen side fully primed up and venting off excess oxygen gas. Just like the bleed valves that we discussed earlier, the goal here is to keep cooling the engine until the point where the liquid oxygen begins pouring out of the Raptor chill vents, which started off as a gas. Once the desired temperature is reached, it's time to quickly prime up the methane side of the engine by opening the main fuel valve and then using helium to spin up the methane turbopump. This sends methane through the engine bells and back to the preburner and then out of the main combustion chamber. Because this is just a spin prime and not a static fire, there is no ignition. So all of the methane must immediately be purged out of the engine using nitrogen once the prime up is complete. Looking at a successful 33 engine spin prime that didn't end in disaster, you can see what I'm talking about. Like I said, there is a lot of surface area on the methane side of the engine that has to be purged out. During this purge, it only makes sense that an equal or greater volume of nitrogen will need to be forced through the engine in order to push out the residual methane. When this happens, it will actually appear as if there is a second spin prime occurring. Shortly after the end of the second surge of gas, you can see the cloud of methane begin to quickly dissipate as nitrogen has now made its way to the main combustion chamber and begins to displace the flammable gases from underneath the launch mount. This is what Elon meant by cryogenic fuel evaporating and mixing with the air. You can see the evaporation occurring even more clearly when you look at it from Lab Padre's thermal camera, also known as Predator 2.0 cam. Notice how quickly it clears away as the nitrogen begins forcing it out of the area. When you look at the top of the screen, you can see the plume pass in front of the tank farm as the thermal energy in the methane cloud has already increased enough for it to begin showing up warmer than the surrounding ambient air.
Thermal cameras are often used in the oil and gas industry to find the source of natural gas leaks. My experience as a field engineer in the petroleum industry is probably the only reason I noticed this and was able to draw a conclusion from it. I say this because I wasn't watching this view in order to prove that SpaceX was dumping 7 tons of methane into the air. The reason I watch Predator Cam during testing events is because this is how I typically identify how many engines are about to be tested before I send out tweets like this one.
Anyways, there are a few more important places that SpaceX has to worry about the buildup of flammable gases. The first is inside of the launch mount, especially since the clamps and Raptor QDs are deployed during this time, so there's plenty of open holes for that methane to enter the table. But we will cover that in part 2 of this deep dive investigation. An even more important area to be concerned about, perhaps, is inside of the engine skirt of the booster. An explosion in here as a result of a buildup of methane and oxygen gas could put the entire vehicle at risk, and by extension, could also put the entire launch pad and surrounding 500 meters or so at risk as well. So, to prevent explosions inside of the skirt, SpaceX has nitrogen purge vents inside of each engine compartment, which you may remember me mentioning on the last deep dive investigation. The outer 20 engines receive their nitrogen directly through the 20 Raptor QD ports. The 13 engines in the center need to get their nitrogen source from another location. And no, they can't just share with the outer 20. So instead, they are likely pulling from the booster QD. If you watched the most recent CSI Starbase episode about the Firex and detonation suppression system on the orbital launch mount, then you probably remember when I mentioned that there would be times that SpaceX needs to run every single nitrogen purge system on the OLM at the same time. During spin prime tests is one of those times that I can think of. Not only to purge away all of the methane in the engine skirt, but also to remove the oxygen from the space beneath the orbital launch mount before the spin prime even occurs. This would significantly reduce the energy released if the gaseous methane somehow manages to find an ignition source. We actually got our first example of this during the Booster 7 multi-engine spin prime test from November 11th. This side-by-side comparison from NASA spaceflight footage shows how quickly the water-infused nitrogen jet disperses the methane cloud from under the table. In the video on the right with the Firex system engaged, you can see that the nitrogen and water combination is actually accelerating the rate of evaporation and forcing the methane out from underneath the launch mount all at the same time. Keep in mind that this is a test of somewhere between 10 to 20 of the outer Raptor boost engines. On the left, we are seeing a 33 engine test, so there is more methane that has to be dispersed. However, I think the effect that this system is having on the cloud is pretty noticeable either way. Removing the oxygen is critical because, as Elon stated, when the fuel mixes with ambient air, there is an inherent risk of spontaneous combustion or a high-energy supersonic detonation. This risk is amplified when the oxygen content in the air is even higher than it normally would be, which was the case during this event. When we review the footage from the explosion one more time, you can see that before the spin prime even begins, there's already a huge cloud of gaseous oxygen underneath the table. The moment the spin prime is initiated, the gaseous oxygen cloud disappears as it's instantly combined into a perfect mixture of methane and oxygen, also known as a MOX sandwich. This MOX cloud is significantly larger than the one we talked about that occurs at the moment of ignition of the Raptor 2 engines. As you can tell, this was simply unacceptable to be allowed to continue, so SpaceX was going to have to do something to remove the initial vaporized oxygen cloud from the equation.
So, what solution did SpaceX engineers come up with in order to enable them to safely continue forward with testing Booster 7 on the orbital launch mount? Well, in my opinion, this is where things start to get interesting.
As a reminder, the Booster 7 explosion occurred on July 11th of 2022. 3 days later, on July 14th, Booster 7 was lifted off the launch mount and sent back to the build site for repairs. While in the Megabay, Booster 7 had all 13 of its center engines removed. Initially, we weren't exactly sure what changes were made to these engines after they were swapped out, but thanks to recent developments, we now have a better understanding of the alterations that were made to these Raptor 2s. We will cover this more later. Meanwhile, back at the launch site, the first of the post-explosion upgrades began to appear. Although this first upgrade was in the works before the detonation event, its arrival was too incredibly well-timed not to mention it here. What I'm referring to is one of SpaceX's favorite new toys, the Orbital Launch Mount Elevated Work Platform. I say this was well-timed because without this aerial work platform, many of the operations that we will touch on in the next few minutes would have taken significantly longer to complete. This is the only upgrade that we were able to notice until B7 made its way back to the launch site. When it finally returned, the homecoming was a bit of a sad one after the chopsticks got damaged right as B7 was moving into position for the lift. The next day, on August 6th, it was lifted back onto the OLM using SpaceX's LR11000 super crane. As you can see in this footage from Cosmic Perspective, the center 13 engines had still not been reinstalled yet at this point. So as SpaceX was preparing for the next round of testing, I was wondering why Booster 7 would be back on the OLM if the changes to the center engines were still not completed. But, learning from past experiences, I had a feeling that this wouldn't be a simple cryo test just to make sure that Booster 7 was still functioning properly after the detonation event. On Monday, August 8th, SpaceX started a week of heavy testing for Booster 7 and Ship 24. This was the first time that we had ever seen simultaneous tests on the orbital launch mount and suborbital pads. As a viewer, this caused a lot of confusion at first, when it seemed Booster 7 would be the one to get things kicked off once the orbital tank farm began to spin up. But before the expected fuel loading process could commence, the suborbital tank farm also came to life, and SpaceX quickly began loading liquid oxygen and methane onto Ship 24 for a 6-engine spin prime test. Note that during these tests, the Raptor chill exhaust venting is being blown upwards by an invisible jet of nitrogen coming from the test stand. This prevents a potential MOX bomb from forming underneath the test stand when nearly 1.3 tons of methane is ejected from the vehicle during this 6-engine spin prime test. This is an estimate based on the assumption that the equivalent process of a 33-engine booster produces 7 tons, as we learned earlier. Shortly after this concluded, SpaceX began preparing for another spin prime test, except this time on B7. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see this spin prime test because I got distracted by something completely unexpected the moment SpaceX began loading fuel onto the booster.
Wait, what? What is that? Is that the new Raptor chill pipe?
Wow. How did I miss this? I didn't even see it installed. Where's it coming from? This immediately kicked off a huge investigation on the CSI Starbase Discord server. We needed to get some detailed images from the opposite side of the OLM in order to figure this one out. But of course, the road was closed again the next morning, so there was no way for Starship Gazer or Mauricio from RGV Aerial Photography to get out to the launch complex and grab us some close-up images from this side of the launch mount. I'm not complaining though, because this was the day that Starship fans around the world had been waiting on for more than a year. It was finally time for the first ever static fire test on the orbital launch mount. I have to admit though, the single-engine static fire test was amazing and all, but I was far more focused on understanding what was going on with this new Raptor chill vent. Basically, instead of depositing the liquid oxygen from the engine chill vent directly underneath the vehicle, it was being redirected out to the side of the launch mount. This actually seemed very familiar to me for some reason, but at the time I couldn't figure out why that was. In the last OLM deep dive investigation, we identified the location of the Raptor chill vents on Booster 7. Connecting to this vent in order to divert it to a new location must be pretty tricky. So how are they doing it? Well, first we need to figure out whether or not this is a test of a single Raptor or if this is multiple engines venting into the same pipe. With how heavy the flow was coming out of the pipe, it's possible that this could be multiple engines connected to this one vent. I quickly realized that this was not the case when the next morning they began adding even more of these pipes onto the underside of the table.
This is when it finally dawned on me how crazy this was potentially about to get. On the morning of August 8th, I tweeted out that the next booster test we see on the OLM was going to look significantly different from anything we have ever seen before, which instantly confused some people. Even Mauricio from RGB Aerial Photos didn't know what I was referring to at the time, and I talked to him multiple times a week. So I gave out a little hint that there would be some major changes to the appearance of the Raptor chill process. If there was one of these vents for each of the outer 20 Raptor engines, it could end up looking like the eye of a hurricane during the Raptor chill down sequence.
But to my dismay, on August 11th, the day of the next static fire test, I was caught off guard when the Raptor chill vent was no longer visible on the front side of the OLM. This was super awkward, and I knew folks were about to start calling me out on Twitter for being wrong with my prediction. Luckily, this test actually did end up being something that we had never seen before because SpaceX performed a long-duration static fire test of a single engine, so it kinda worked out. The next day, Mauricio was finally able to get out to the launch complex. This was the first time we had someone on site since the beginning of all this craziness. These are the first images that we received showing the new pipes that were added onto the table. With the boosters sitting on top of the launch mount, it was difficult to see underneath to determine how these were being connected to the engines. We were extremely lucky that Mauricio was able to catch this glimpse in between two of the engine bells. When I saw this picture for the first time, I was extremely confused.
What is going on here? How are these supposed to connect to the engines? Are they Bluetooth?
Looking closely, I noticed some green painted lines on the inside edge of the table skirt that hadn't been there before, which suggested that there may be even more of these still to come. Because they seem to be mounted in pairs, I assumed that there may actually be 2 for each of the outer 20 engines. So that would mean there are 40 of these pipes in total. The reason I figured there would be 2 for each engine is because there are 4 drain ports on each Raptor. Based on this diagram of the Raptor engine, it makes sense that there are 2 LOX drains and 2 CH4 drains. Of course, this is a Raptor 1 we are seeing here, but these drain ports still exist on Raptor 2. Also, the end of the pipes looked very similar to the fittings found on the drain ports, which is where this pipe should be attached to. It does look a little larger than the drain pipes, but it's hard to tell without seeing them next to each other. 5 days later, on August 16th, there was another important addition made. We noticed that SpaceX engineers had added a new circular manifold around the table. That's when it became clear that they were planning to collect it and send it somewhere else. This makes a lot more sense than the alternative, which is dumping it over the side of the table, where it most likely would still find a way to mix with the methane cloud during the spin prime test. Some of you might be thinking, well, wouldn't this be a problem on the suborbital pad as well? The answer is yes. As you can see, the existing system is clearly not doing enough to redirect the flow of liquid oxygen from making its way to the underside of the test stand. Luckily, SpaceX is in the process of upgrading this to a more powerful system called the Ultra Purge. 2 days after the manifold was lifted into place, we got some close-up images of it, allowing us to see the ports where each of the pipes would later be connected to after they were bent into the correct positions. Looking at the right side of the manifold, you can see that it dips down and goes underneath the BQD shield. Some of the pipes were already connected on this side. After the pipe continues past the gigantic QD hood, it is connected to a T-fitting, which completes the circular manifold around the table. As you can tell, once both ends of the manifold join together at the T, the pipe diameter is increased. This should reduce any possible flow restrictions that can occur when the split flow combines into one. This larger pipe goes down the legs and into the doghouse at the base. From there, it comes out of the little hole they drilled into the steel box and then turns down into the ground. It reemerges inside of this concrete tube, which is either used to protect everything on the outside from the internal explosions or protect what's inside from external explosions. But if they were worried about that, then every pipe on the launch mount would be covered, so I don't think that's the case. This is an alternate solution to burying a bunch of precast culverts like these ones into the ground and then covering them up with concrete. By the way, a little off topic, but these just randomly showed up to the suborbital farm a few weeks ago which is incredibly odd. Definitely be on the lookout over the coming weeks to see if these are put to use soon. Anyways, since these culverts weren't needed, it saved a lot of time as they quickly ran this pipe over to the new U-shaped berm, which had just been added the week before. A few weeks later, this is what the finished product looked like. As you can tell, the sloped walls of the bowl are about 6 to 8 feet high, which makes this a pretty decently sized collection basin. Thanks to Mauricio, we can see what this looks like in action during all stages of the Raptor chill process. The moment liquid oxygen loading begins on the booster, gaseous oxygen from the Raptor chill pipes will start venting from the outlet at the collection basin. From this aerial perspective, it's easier to identify the moment that the flow transitions over to the liquid phase as a LOX pool begins to form inside of the pit. The Raptor chill remains active for the entire LOX loading process, which directly affects what you will see inside of this pit. The more liquid oxygen loaded onto the booster, the longer the Raptor chill sequence will be, and that means this pit will continue to fill even longer. When you increase the amount of engines being tested, the rate of liquid flow into this pit will increase as well. The next phase in this process happens when the liquid oxygen pumps shut down and the butterfly valve on the booster QD for the main fill ports is closed. After this, you will notice the bleed valve on the side of the OLM open back up and begin draining liquid oxygen from the tri-blade vent. This is an important moment that I don't think a lot of people fully understand. What you're seeing here is the liquid oxygen flex hose being drained of its contents. This is most likely a safety precaution in case something were to go wrong with the booster QD connection. It also reduces the weight of the flex hoses, which is probably critical for making sure that the quick disconnect and retraction mechanism for the BQD functions properly. These massive hoses have to move with the hood mechanism as it opens and closes, so if they remain filled, it would dramatically increase the stress on the hydraulic system. Anyways, once the flex hoses are empty and the bleed valve is shut, you can consider the fuel loading process complete. LOX bath, anyone? So now we pretty much understand everything except how the outer 20 engines connect to this pipe on the collection manifold. Up to this point, I had my assumption of how this worked, but I needed to be sure. When Booster 7 returned to the launch complex after having all 13 of its center engines reinstalled on August 23rd, I realized this might be my only chance to catch SpaceX in the process of hooking all this stuff up. As soon as it was lifted onto the launch mount, the stakeout was underway. Sometime around 2 in the morning the following day, I found what I was looking for. 2 workers up on a man basket lifting what I assumed was 40 blue flex hoses onto the work platform.
If you get anything out of this episode, remember this. If you're going to be the type of person who likes to quickly jump to conclusions like me, make sure you're also equally as quick to identify signs that you got it wrong.
When I noticed the worker in the back lifting up a handful of red hoses, an alarm was immediately triggered in my brain. Wait, what? Why are those ones a different color? Is it possible that half of these drains are oxygen and the other half are methane? That would be awkward. Combining them into a mixed flow inside of the collection manifold? But no, it turns out that this was something different. The red hoses were actually longer than the blue ones, and there were significantly less of them since he was able to lift all of them at once. Shortly after this, I was watching as the workers began to connect the hoses to each of the outer 20 engines. I noticed that almost all of the hoses I was seeing being passed around were blue, not a single red one. I also noticed that there was still one lonely pipe in the middle of the skirt. I was expecting another one to have been installed next to it by now, so this would give us 3 sets of 2 collection pipes in between each of the 6 legs for a total of 36. Wait, and that's when it clicked.
Oh, nah. There's 33 of them, not 40. Wow.
The reason there are 5 on this side and 6 on the other one directly across from it is because if you have 5 pipes between each set of legs, that gives you 30 in total. Which means the sides with 6 pipes must be where the 3 center engines are routed to. The red hoses must be longer in order to reach the center 13 engines. Now that I finally understood how the engines were being connected to the collection manifold, it makes a lot more sense why the curved sections of engine shielding for Booster 7 were never replaced. Leaving the shield off makes it easier to reach the drain, which has likely been relocated since it won't be needed to point straight down towards the ground anymore. I believe that in order to reach the center 13 engines, the hoses for those engines must also come in through the same openings. If not, they would have to be ran in between the engine bells, and that sounds like a terrible idea considering they will have to survive static fire testing. Of course, this also explains why the robustness upgrades everyone was expecting still did not include the curved shielding, which has been missing ever since Booster 7 decided to ejecto-cedo. Seriously though, these hoses for the center 13 engines? Wow, I can't even imagine trying to route those through all of that pipework. But 2 days later I realized, It might actually be necessary to do just that, and here's why. On August 25th, I got my first close-up of the Raptor chill pipes in action. I missed the first triple spin prime test because, I was at work. I could have caught the second one, but I missed that one as well because after I saw this, I realized that I had some work to do. While most people watching the live stream were checking out the rain falling from the wet engine bells, I was staring at these 3 pipes right here. As you can see, they look like they are white instead of shiny and silver. The reason is because they're covered in frost because there is liquid oxygen still boiling off inside of the Raptor engines. This is amazing. Just by looking at these pipes, you can count how many engines are about to be involved in the spin prime or static fire test. If only I knew which engines they connected to, maybe I could predict which ones were about to be tested. This could come in handy for later. So I got to work trying to figure out exactly how these were laid out, starting with figuring out which sides had 6 pipes instead of 5, so I could determine where the center engines were located. In order to do this, we need a common reference point. The best one to use is this picture from Elon, which is deceptively hard to figure out which way it's facing, so I'll help you out. This is basically looking in the direction if you were facing the booster QD from the same angle that Cosmic Perspective had during the 7-engine static fire test. So now that we know which direction this is pointing in, let's run through this quickly. Looking under the skirt at the far side, we can see 4 pipes. But that's not one of the options though, so we have to move to the backside. Now that we're here, we can count the pipe fittings that have been welded onto the manifold in this section. On the far right, we can see a single inlet to the right of the second double grouping. As a quick observation before we continue, the fittings for the outer 20 engines should be evenly spaced around the manifold. Anytime we see 2 pipes next to each other like this, it means that one of them is going to the center ring of 10. This is because it has to go up through the closest open engine shield cover in order to get there. At the next section, we have 6 pipes, but I labeled this as 5 because you will see that one of them actually goes up inside of the table. If I had to guess, this is used for monitoring internal pressure or possibly something else, but we still aren't at that part of the investigation yet. Next, a real group of 6 engines and another one right next to it, followed by 5 in between the 2 legs that Rover 2 camera is usually pointing towards, and then we can assume the last one is 6. Once I determined where the groups of 5 and 6 were located, it was time to figure out how the engines were being grouped together. This was probably the most difficult part to figure out, but after a late night with CSI Special Agent Jax, we were able to come up with an engine grouping that made sense. The next part was going to be key, because I needed to figure out how to properly route the pipes as accurately as possible if I wanted to be able to predict which ones were being tested. About halfway through, I got really frustrated with how complex this was. There has to be a way of simplifying all this. I feel like the center 13 engines should be routed through the booster QD or something. I mean, I know that adds a little bit of pipework in order to create a manifold for these 13 engines, but maybe it could be offset by, using the booster QD to start the center 13 engines? If the launch mount was responsible for starting all 33 engines instead of just the outer 20, then the booster would only need enough COPVs for boost back and the landing burn. Depending on how many engines are used during the boost back burn phase, the total amount of COPVs needed on the booster could be cut in half. I usually keep thoughts like this to myself, but I decided to tweet it out as a question to Elon. Then I threw my phone to the side and went back to work. The next morning, Elon surprisingly responded to my tweet with the following statement. Agreed. We recently made this change and many others. Wow, that's pretty groundbreaking. But the reason I was surprised, because he sent it out in a tweet.
Bro, I'm right over here on the other side of the high bay.
I mean, I appreciated it, but he could have just walked over and told me. And what's with the second part of this tweet?
An intense effort is underway to achieve robust engine containment in case of RUD to protect booster, other engines, and launch ring?
Well, that didn't really have anything to do with my question.
Wait, is this some kind of hint? Oh, I like these kind of games.
I had to sit on that one for a while because I thought he was trying to distract me from this investigation. So I finally finished my diagram, and this is what it looks like. Pretty neat, right? I call it the Super Heavy Spaghetti Special. It's a special because it's only here for a limited time, because the booster cannot launch like this. There is no way. But before we go and worry about what the permanent solution will need to look like, let's go have some fun with this and enjoy it while it lasts. It's time to put everything we have learned since the start of this investigation to the test, starting with this footage of the Booster 7 single-engine static fire test on August 31st. Playing this video at high speed for effect, if you were to look at the manifold on the left side of the leg, you can see what occurs as soon as the Raptor chill begins. the entire manifold begins to frost over. Note that it starts from just to the left of the T. It then quickly descends down the leg of the OLM. Simultaneously, it starts to travel in the direction to the right of the T union. And here you can quickly see that all of a sudden, it starts to be difficult to see which direction it's traveling because the whole pipe frosts over at the same time. If we zoom in, you can see the reason why it appears this way. The Raptor chill pipe in the very middle of the screen is filling with liquid oxygen at the same time as the first engine on the left side of the T. We won't be able to pinpoint that engine from this angle, but we can identify engine number 2. Based on the fact that we are looking at it from this angle, I believe that we should be seeing this engine right here. When we look at the static fire test, it seems to line up pretty well, but it's hard to know for sure without some additional help. And of course, in this case, one of the only people who's going to be able to tell us for sure which engines is actually being fired is Ryan Hansen Space. So with his help, I wanted to test my theory during the next major testing event. Thanks to Ryan, we were able to get a diagram of which engines were tested so we could go back and see how well they lined up with my groupings. We only had one good angle of this test where it zoomed in enough to see the frosted pipes, so we can for sure see one right here and then another one on the other side. This should correspond with these two engines highlighted here, which according to Ryan's diagram lines up perfectly. There is another one over to the right side which is also frosted, and I believe this matches up with the Raptor boost engine right here. This diagram might not be perfect, but the point is, now you at least know what to look for when watching these tests. It gets even easier if you're using Lab Padre's Predator camera, which is my favorite camera for watching static fire tests. This is what it looks like when a 3-engine static fire is about to happen. You can tell it's a low number of engines because the manifold is patchy and only parts of it are blue. When you do see the blue patches of ultra-cold pipe, that means there is an engine nearby in chill-down mode. The engine group directly in front of us will not be tested at all in this example. On the flip side, this is what it looks like when SpaceX is preparing to do a 33 engine test. You can see that the collection manifold is glowing blue, and there are black lines coming down from where each of the individual collection pipes are. From this distance, some of the pipes are too close together to distinguish apart from each other, so they appear as a single black line. There are some obvious limitations with trying to spot the frosted chill lines. If we don't have a view of the backside of the launch mount, then we can really only see about half of the Raptor chill lines attached. So, to actually identify every engine position on the table would require some coordination from every livestream camera that has a clear view of the launch mount. They would all need to be zoomed in, looking for it at the same time.
Anyways, as cool as this is, what we're looking at is not really a good thing. I think we can all agree that this is a temporary solution, and SpaceX cannot launch like this with 33 manual disconnects attached inside of the engine skirt. So what are they going to do? We haven't seen them working on any other permanent solutions, right? Well, what if I told you that SpaceX might already have a solution for this, but for some reason, they're just not using it? Between me and you, I think they might even be afraid of it. I gotta say that quietly because I'm pretty sure that this tower can hear me. This is the only system on the orbital launch mount that I have never once seen in action. I want to warn all of you that what I'm about to tell you is highly speculative in nature. There is a strong possibility that some of the information you're about to hear could be incorrect. As you can tell, the orbital launch mount is an extremely complicated machine, so take everything I say with a huge pinch of salt.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait until part 2 of this deep dive investigation to answer these questions. This might have seemed like all the information you could possibly need, but trust me, we have a lot more to cover and you're not going to want to miss this. So make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also hit the alert icon so you don't miss the next premiere. Hopefully those of you who are returning viewers can tell that I really went out of my way to create a different experience for you all this time around. I know a lot of folks like this type of format of actually being on site at Starbase far more than the green screen. If you would like to see more of these types of deep dive investigations and would like to help contribute to making it possible for me to do this more often, then please consider joining the channel as a YouTube member or becoming a monthly supporter on Patreon. Both options will give you access to the CSI Starbase Discord server depending on the tier. For those who would like to have an immediate impact and donate towards the Cinematic Camera Fund so we can drastically improve the quality of these skits and cutscenes, then you could do so by donating to CSI Starbase on PayPal using the link in the description. We're just over halfway there, so I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has supported this channel so far. Hopefully I didn't miss any of your names in the credits. If so, don't hesitate to reach out to me on Patreon and let me know. Last but not least, I want to give another massive shout out to Marcus House, Starship Gazer, and Tim Dodd for their direct contributions to this episode, and also to the photographers and 3D forensics agents whose footage was used here today. Without them, none of this would be possible. If you would like to support any of these artists, you can find the links to their various platforms in the descriptions. But I want to let you all know that by supporting CSI Starbase, you are also supporting these photographers and 3D artists. The reason I say that is because we have committed to reinvesting 2/3 of our Patreon income back into these content creators. As I said, we truly need them in order to continue doing what we do here. So thank you all again for watching part 1 of this deep dive investigation. Don't forget to tune in to the Starbase weekly live stream hosted by RGV Aerial Photography every Saturday at noon Central Time. I don't always have time to cover everything during these episodes, so there is a ton of stuff that you will only hear on those live streams. Another thing you can only get from RGV Aerial is this awesome t-shirt with the Starship TPS tiles on it. If you want one of these for yourself or for someone special in your life, then check out the RGV merch store, which I have linked in the description. With that, it looks like my time is up. I'll see you all on part 2 of this investigation. Until then, Stage Zero Zach, signing off.